Good morning. Welcome to Glazing with AMACO. I think I'm starting a little bit on the early side, but that's okay. I am going to talk today about the SMUGs, which is what we call the semi-moist underglaze colors. So SMUG, SMUGs. They're also sometimes called the watercolor underglazes. And that's because they work just like using watercolors. So if you've used watercolor paints, the semi-moist underglazes will work pretty much the same. So I've already done a video where I talked about using the SMUGs over 3 coats of SM11 white, the satin matte white, and then firing it to cone 5. In this case, I'm actually going to work as if it was an underglaze, which it is, directly onto bisque, and then it'll be fired with a clear glaze on top. So this plate was started some like 7 or 8 years ago. And recently when I was rummaging around in my studio, I found it, realized it had never been fired, and of course it was very dirty. So I brought it in and got it fired. No glaze on it. This is just the first coating of SMUGs that I had put on there. So one of the things that I want to make sure I don't forget to tell everybody is that when you're using the SMUGs, my favorite way of making sure that you're not scrubbing, making sure that these work really well, is to get some clean water and put a few drops directly on the colors that you're going to be using. So I know I'm going to be using black. So I put a few drops on there. I'm going to be using some brown, some of this beige, the dark green, the warm green, a few other colors. I'll just put a few here and there where I know I'm going to be using them, and I let that water sit on there for a few minutes. Don't it's got some, this one got a little color on there that I don't want. Well, I'm just going to work around that. A little water on the white, on suntan. Now, a few things. One of the most confusing is that most of these are going to be what you see is what you get. The color that you see is what it will look like. However, this one looks like purple. It is not purple. It is dark blue. It will fire navy blue. Keep that in mind. If you use the dark blue thinking it's going to be purple, you will be very, very disappointed. How do I know this? One of the first times I used them, I did exactly that, and boy was I not excited about my results. Because I thought it would be purple, and it was very, very blue. So, the rest of them, like medium blue, lilac, amethyst, they're going to come out pretty much how you expect them to. So I'm going to let those colors kind of sit a little bit. There we go. I wanted to get a little gray. And I just let the water sit on there. Make sure my water's clean. I'm also going to use some pencils today. Now this, as I said, this was decorated with the SMUGs, and then it was bisque fired. So the colors are on there. They are a little bit powdery, but they're not going to come off. But I do want to clean this, and I want to show you a trick for seeing how your underglazes will look when they're fired. Make sure I get all the schmutz and dust and everything off of there. Most everything came off when it was fired, but just to be on the safe side. There we go. Now, with some clean water and a clean sponge, you can also just do this with and you can see that is roughly what it will look like when a clear glaze is on it. You can do this with a spray bottle if you don't want to just dump water on your plate. But you can see how some of the colors are going to be brighter, some of them are going to burn out a little bit. The SMUGs are very strong colors. They are as saturated as any underglaze you will ever use. So keep that in mind when you're using them, that the colors are going to be very, very strong. You can use a little bit of extra water to make sure that they're not too strong. But you just use them. I'm going to go over some of these and get a little more depth on. The dark green is one of the most opaque of the SMUGs. Some of them are a little more transparent than others. But just like using any kind of watercolor paint, just lay down your areas of color. Now, as I've said, some of the colors, let's see, I want that light yellow for some of this. Now some of this is really much lighter than what I had wanted, so I'm needing to deepen some of these areas. Now you'll notice that, so once the water has been sitting on the underglaze for a little while, it comes up very easily, so you don't have to scrub it. I don't like having to scrub my paints. It's not good for my brushes. It's really tedious, and you don't get a strong color. The longer you can let the color, the water sit on a color, the better you will have in terms of getting more material on your brush. You'll have a better result. Now I said I would also talk about pencils. I'm going to add some pencil drawing onto this as well. Kind of soften this line around the edges of my sushi rolls and maki. So I'm going to add some pencil lines. Now, of course, you have to use an underglaze pencil if you want to have anything show up. If you use a graphite pencil, you know, it just burns right out. Which can be great if you're trying to get some, try to show where you want to put your design. You can sketch things out with a graphite pencil ahead of time and then come back and paint everything in. But if what you're wanting is more of a, use this to kind of blend a little bit. If what you're wanting, no, I'm not. If what you're wanting is, I know one of these has it. How will that work? But if you're wanting something that'll fire on, obviously you need to make sure that you use an underglaze pencil. You can also use the SMUGs with other underglazes, like the velvets, for example. I would probably use the velvets as like a base, do blocks of color, and then do detail with the SMUGs. Another thing to keep in mind, the SMUGs, you can buy the individual pans, the individual colors. So, for example, if you run out of a favorite color, you can buy the individual color. You don't have to buy a whole new watercolor pan. It can also be a way to try out a new color if you want to see how a particular color works with the SMUGs. Just buy one. You don't have to have the whole pan. Now, since I've already fired the main areas of color, I am not going to change those very much. They won't change as I paint over. Let's see. I need that yellow. And of course, the more you work, you can actually make the SMUGs fairly opaque. And it's one of the great things about the white is you can get the white to be very opaque if you use enough of it. Let's see. I do prefer to bisque my SMUGs on before I apply glaze. However, if you want to apply glaze directly on top of the SMUGs without firing, the easiest way to make sure you don't smudge anything, make it move around and get all messy, is to use a sponge and very gently dab the clear glaze on for the first coat, and then after that coat has dried, you can apply the rest with brushing just like normal. You can also do that with the chalks. It's if you don't wish to fire them on first, apply your first coat of glaze by sponging very gently. You can also dip or spray if those are options for you. I know that when I do the underglaze demos, these are not the most fast or exciting demos, but I hope that they are satisfying and give you some ideas about things you can do with the materials. So my favorite method is to work directly on top of glaze, but I started this, as I said, many years ago, and so I didn't know about using it on top at that time. So we're just going to go with it the way we have it going today. And I will glaze this later this week, and I'll bring it back and show you guys when it is done. You can see how it turned out. The trick of getting things wet, like either using a spray bottle to wet your underglazes or just gently putting some water over your underglazes, that works with all underglazes. It works with velvets. I generally don't do that unless the underglaze has been fired on. But if you have bisqued your underglazes onto your piece and you're not sure if you need a little bit more, if it's going to show up, it's a good way to kind of gauge whether your underglazes are going to burn out, if they've been thick enough. Now, if it's a color that fades at high temperatures, it won't help, but for the most part, it will show you if your colors, if you don't have a thick enough application. Here we go. Well, I'm glad you guys are here with me today. It's, like I said, not always the most exciting thing to see somebody underglazing. But I hope that it gives you some ideas. So as I was describing a little bit about the SMUGs earlier and saying how they're very saturated, and I know that there are a lot of people who like to use the velvets like a watercolor, and if you water them down, you can do that. They don't have as much colorant in them, so you're going to have more saturated color with using the SMUGs than using the velvets or any other underglazes on the market. Honestly, I don't think there are any underglazes that are really usable in quite the same way as the SMUGs. So I have my pencils. They're not terribly sharp. So things with the pencils. If you're going to be using underglaze pencils, I sharpen them with a razor, just a craft knife or a utility knife. You can get a sharper point if you use a pencil sharpener. I do not recommend using an electric pencil sharpener or one of the grinding kind of pencil sharpeners. Use the kind that just has a blade and you just manually turn it, because the underglaze that's inside is very delicate. If you drop your underglaze pencils a lot, if you use an electric pencil sharpener, it can break up the underglaze that's in there, and then as you sharpen it, your underglaze just kind of falls out. So I suggest just doing it by hand, and I just kind of use them just like a pencil. So I'm just using it to give a little more depth, make it look a little bit more sketchy. That doesn't sound right. I'm not trying to make sketchy sushi. Nobody wants sketchy sushi. Now, if I go over the pencil areas with water, it will soften them and they will kind of come out more watercolory looking. So I'm just going to use this as like a last step. Although it could be a really interesting combination to use the pencils and then go over them with some water. And I've also seen people do the same thing with the chalks. So if you're using the Underglaze chalks, you can also do the same kind of thing. You can go back and use a little water with them. Do a little hand roll. Now, people who come to ceramics after having been artists for many years and having painted and used regular media, you know, non-ceramic media, who've used pencils, who've used paint, ceramics can be really different. For one thing, you definitely have to apply more material, and your contrast has to be a lot higher. It helps if you, instead of spending a lot of time on one piece when you first get started, do some small tiles. Just try some different things, and you know, think of it as like gesture drawings that you would do in a drawing class, where you just kind of experiment and get a feel for the material, because it is going to be different. So where something might look a little too gaudy or a little too strong, if you're used to using paint, when you're using underglaze, you want it to be really a little bit more contrast than what you're accustomed to. That is possibly one of the biggest issues I see with people who have started with paint and then come to underglazes and ceramics, is that they get frustrated because they're expecting that the colors will look exactly the same when they're fired with a clear glaze over them as they do before they're fired, and they don't. So you need to get kind of a grip on how that works and how it's affected. And once you get that feel for it, once you get that feel for the material, it will be second nature. So you kind of paint it a little bit extra, and then it will fire out about right. It's like this yellow, you know, it looks like it's really, really, really vivid, acidy yellow, but I want it to fire out stronger, so I'm going to add a little bit more. So colored pencils come, the Underglaze pencils come in a lot of different colors, and not just in black and brown. We have yellow, we have blue, we have green. We are limited by certain materials, but we try to get a wide variety. And they can be used just like a regular pencil, but for really, really fine lines, it's really hard to get a pencil, an Underglaze pencil, to hold a really sharp line, because you're basically drawing on what's the equivalent of sandpaper. So it's just taking that edge right down every single time you use it. So if you're wanting to get a really, really crisp line with underglazes, you're better off using a brush and doing really, really fine lines with a fine brush. And for most things, I prefer using an edged brush like this, where it's kind of a chisel point. But for sharp lines, this is the brush to use. Long bristle, so it holds a lot of material. And what color do I need? I think I'm going to use a little bit of this rose. And then practice making kind of quick lines, and you will get really, really fine lines. But for laying down color or kind of blending colors, I like to use my little chisel edge brush. So I'm going to kind of wrap this up. I think that I've got most of what I wanted to change on here. And, okay, I need to fix that. It's not what I was going for there. But I'm going to wrap this up, and I will fire it, put some glaze on it later this week, fire it, and I will post it on the group page so that you have an idea of what it looks like and how it came out. And if you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, please drop them in the comments, and I will answer them offline. I am hoping that next week we will have a setup where it will, one, be closed captioned as I do the video, so you will be able to watch the live video closed captioned, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I will also be able to see questions live instead of having to answer them offline. Won't that be nice? Oh, I need more green on here. So next week I'm hoping that we have a new setup, and it'll look the same, but it will have some extra, there will be some extra accessibility for everybody, and you can ask me questions and I can answer them online, and then I can see everybody's comments as you watch. Won't that be fun? Make sure these greens are nice and bright. So I am looking forward to having a new way of interacting with you all, and I'm glad that everybody enjoys these videos. It's been a lot of fun, but I'm going to just love it so much more when I can talk to everybody in the moment. So here we go. Of course, now that I've done this, all I can think about is how I want to go out and have some sushi for lunch. And boy, that just looks too yummy. Thank you guys for joining me. This has been SMUGs, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Have a great week. Happy glazing.